Welcome back to First Chapter Fridays. Today we are going to be reading Hatchet by Gary Paulsen. Gary Paulsen is a really wonderful author. He has won a ton of awards. And to be honest, when guys come to the library and have no idea what to check out, he's usually the author that I direct them to, just because his books are thriller, adventurous, outdoorsy kind of books. And I really enjoy them, and most people that I recommend them to also enjoy them. The way that he writes is really intriguing and interesting to read. So we have a brand new copy of the Hatchet. I just ordered it because I feel like every library needs it, and our copy was lost a couple years ago. And then we are going to be doing something a little bit different, just because the first chapter is so long. So I'm actually going to start like kind of in the middle and finish the first chapter with you guys. So just to sum up what is happening, Brian is 13. His parents are newly divorced. He is going to Canada from New York to spend the summer with his dad. He's in this tiny little plane. It's only him and the pilot, and the pilot is starting to not feel well. Brian's not really sure what's going on, but that's where we are. So we are actually we're going to start in the middle of a flashback when he is on the way to the airport with his mom. Okay, here we go. Flashback. She reached over the back of the seat and brought up a paper bag. I got something for you for the trip. Brian took the sack and opened the top. Inside there was a hatchet, the kind with a steel handle and a rubber hand grip. The head was in a stout leather case that had a brass riveted belt loop. It goes on your belt. His mother spoke now without looking at him. There were some farm trucks in the roads now, and she had to weave through them and watch traffic. The man at the store said you could use it, in the woods with your father. Dad, he thought, not my father, my dad. Thanks, it's really nice. But the words sounded hollow, even to Brian. Try it on, see how it looks on your belt. And he would normally have said no, that it looked way too hokey to have a hatchet on your belt. Those were the normal things he would say. But her voice was so thin, had a sound like something thin that would break if you touched it, and he felt bad for not wanting to speak to her. Knowing what he knew, even with the anger, the hot, white hate of his anger at her, he still felt bad for not speaking to her. So, to try to humor her, he loosened his belt, pulled the right side out, and put the hatchet on. Scooch around so I can see. He moved around in the seat, feeling only slightly ridiculous. She nodded. Just like a scout, my little scout. And there was the tenderness in her voice that she had when he was small. The tenderness she had when he was small and sick with a cold, and she put her hand on his forehead. The burning came to his eyes again, and he had to turn away from her, looked out the window. He had forgotten the hatchet on his belt, and so he arrived at the plane with the hatchet still there. Because it was a bush flight from a small airport, there had been no security, and the plane had been waiting with the engine running when he arrived. He grabbed a suitcase and pack bag and ran for the plane without stopping to remove the hatchet. So it was still on his belt. At first he'd been embarrassed, but the pilot had said nothing about it, and Brian forgot it as they took off and began flying. More smell now. Bad. Brian turned around to glance at the pilot, who had both his hands on his stomach. He was grimacing in pain, reaching for the left shoulder again as Brian watched. Don't know, kid. The pilot's words were a hiss, barely audible. Bad aches here, bad aches. Thought it was something I ate, but... He stopped as a fresh spasm of pain hit him. Even Brian could see how bad it was. The pain drove the pilot back into the seat, back and down. I've never had anything like this. The pilot reached for a switch on his mic cord, his hand coming up from a small arc from his stomach. He flipped the switch and said, "This is flight 46, and now a jolt." Took him like a hammer blow, so forcefully that he seemed to crush back in his seat, and Brian reached for him. Could not understand at first what was... He didn't know. And then he knew. Brian knew. The pilot's mouth went rigid. He swore and jerked, and a short series of slams into the seat, holding his shoulder now, sore and hissed. Chest! Oh my God! My chest! It's coming apart! Brian knew now. The pilot was having a heart attack. Brian had been in the shopping mall with his mother when a man in front of Paisley's store had suffered a heart attack. He had gone down and screamed about his chest, an old man, much older than this pilot. Brian knew. The pilot was having a heart attack, and even as the knowledge came to Brian, he saw the pilot slam into the seat one more time. One more awful time, he slammed back into the seat, and his right leg jerked, pulling the plane to the side in a sudden twist, and his head fell forward, and spit came. Spit came from the corner of his mouth, and his legs contracted up into the seat, and his eyes rolled back in his head until there was only white. Only white for eyes. And the smell became worse, filled the cockpit, all of it so fast, so incredibly fast that Brian's mind could not take it at first. Could only see it in stages. The pilot had been talking just a moment ago, complaining of the pain. He had been talking. Then the jerks came. Then the jolts that took the pilot back had come. And now Brian sat there. And there was a strange feeling of silence and the thrumming roar of the engine. A strange feeling of silence and being alone. Brian stopped. He was stopped. Inside, he was stopped. He could not think past what he saw, what he felt. All was stopped. The very core of him, the very center of Brian Robson, was stopped and stricken with white flash of horror, a terror so intense that it was that his breathing, his thinking, and his heart nearly stopped. Seconds later, seconds that became all of his life, and he began to know that what he was seeing, began to understand what he saw, and that was worse, so much worse than what he wanted to make his mind, freeze again. I'm struggling today. He was sitting in a bush plane roaring 7,000 feet above the northern wilderness with a pilot who had suffered a massive heart attack and who was either dead or in something close to a coma. He was alone. In the roaring plane with no pilot, he was alone. And that is chapter 1. And it gets really crazy, y'all, just so you know. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. This is called The Hatchet, and it is wonderful. Have a great day.